transparency and empathy. Whether these are core values for your firm or something you embody or something you want to embody, they oftentimes are the core of what we do as lawyers, helping our clients have transparency on the work that we're doing and empathizing with them as they go through what is oftentimes the most complicated and difficult part of their life. So joining me today to talk about this, Emily Sumner. Emily's an immigration lawyer based in Richmond, Virginia, and serving clients throughout the United States and around the world. She started her own practice over 11 years ago to be able to serve her clients with transparency, efficiency, and empathy. And then, we just cut efficiency out of this chat for, whatever reason. No, that being said, Emily, so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
What made you want to be an immigration lawyer?
I was a Spanish major in undergrad, and I wanted to practice speaking with native speakers. So I asked my Spanish professor, what can I do? I thought about going to law school, and he said, oh, there's this immigration lawyer in town. This was in North Carolina. And I was 18. I'd never heard of an immigration lawyer or immigration law before, but I contacted that person. I followed up until she gave me an unpaid internship, and I loved it. She loved me, and I stayed on as a student paralegal the rest of my undergrad career, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I like that I work with clients from all over the world. I like that it accommodates my OCD nature with form filling. I don't actually fill out the forms these days. I have people to do that for me, but I like that you have to be very precise and methodical, but there's also a gray area, obviously, to immigration law, which is why I have a job. So I think all of those put together, it's the ideal area of law for me.
I wonder, I got to be honest, you're the first person I've ever talked to that had that first experience and had that be the practice area. Like everybody else, especially that first experience is usually the practice area they run the farthest from. What advice or guidance do you have for somebody in making that decision and figuring that out? I know you mentioned the OCD nature of it and the work that you get to do, but help me help somebody else through that process of figuring out what law is right for them.
To try different areas, which I know is kind of the exact opposite of what I just said. I feel very fortunate that I happened to fall in love, at first sight with the first area of law that I came upon, but that's not normal. It's not, I don't think it's healthy or realistic for a college student or even law student to, in their first or even second year, or even third, to think, oh my gosh, I have to know what I'm going to practice for the next 40 years of my life. That's not normal. That's not how it works. So I would say if you don't know exactly what you want to do within law, to try different areas, to be open, stay open-minded, and to know that it's okay. Again, I'm not practicing what I'm preaching here, but to know that it's okay to go into one area of law and then change your mind. You might do something totally different that you love later, and that's totally fine. You don't have to have the answer at age 18 or 25 or even 40.
I love that. So, but for you, I guess the flip side of this, it felt right. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the rundown.
Absolutely. And I tried other areas of law because I thought, okay, what if this isn't as great as I think that it is? I tried tax. I had internships in taxation, internships at the U.S. Attorney's Office, so civil and criminal litigation, and it was not for me. There were aspects in both of those opportunities. There were ties to immigration law, but those opportunities were not for me.
So walk me through the early days of starting a practice. We'll tie this into how transparency and empathy became core values, but tell me, what was it like on, day one or even day -1?
Day -1, I was an associate for 6 years at a boutique immigration law firm, and I had a great experience. My boss was a great mentor. I learned a lot from her. I formed great relationships, but I knew that I wanted more control over my practice. I'm something of a control freak. I don't like being told what to do. And I knew that wasn't the right option for me long-term. So for years before I resigned and started my own practice, my husband encouraged me to do it. My family encouraged me to do it. I had clients that would email and say, Emily, when you start your own firm, I want to follow you. When I actually did it, it was, of course, scary as all get out, because you don't know what, if any, clients are going to follow you. In Virginia, we have to send a joint letter saying this attorney's moving. You have the option of staying, going, or going somewhere completely different. So you have no idea. And at the time, we had a 3-year-old son, of course, a mortgage, a dog. My husband was in grad school. So there's a lot going on. And my husband was like, Emily, just if you can just cover the mortgage, we'll be fine financially. If you can just cover that. And our son was in full-time daycare, which is like equivalent to a mortgage, as you may know.
Or worse, depending upon what part of town.
Yeah, for sure. It's like paying for college sometimes. But anyway, he said, if you can just cover the mortgage, then that'll be good. And so it was nice. I feel very fortunate that I had him supportive, not only financially, but emotionally and physically, like all the things. I mean, I went out of town the week before the transition weekend, and between the end of one position and the beginning of another. And he had set up my home office with, all the supplies and wall decor. He was just so supportive. And I don't take that for granted, or I try not to. But it was very helpful that I had that financial support. And I didn't feel like I had to and I didn't have to support the entire family. I just had to make a contribution. So that was helpful.
So what was, let's help more people make this same. Actually, let me start here. I assume that it was a great decision to open your own firm. All right. So assuming that part, let's help more, I guess, not law firm owners make that jump. Like, what was the thing that finally got you over the hump from, 6 years as an associate, having people tell you this with the 3-year-old, but like, what finally got not the straw that broke the camel's back, but the thing that ripped the Band-Aid off, if you will?
That's a good question. I think just realizing that there's never going to be the perfect moment to do it. I talk to people now who are interested in starting their own practice, and they say, well, I don't have enough clients to come with me. Well, you never know if clients are going to come with you. Or they say, I don't have enough money saved up. You're never going to feel like you have enough money saved up. It's like when my husband and I decided to have a child, and we thought about, okay, what are the elements we want to have in place before we do this? And we finally, he was thinking at the time, thinking about starting grad school, all different considerations, like, what are we going to do for daycare? Is one of us going to stay home? Do we do a daycare nanny? All the things. And we finally decided, you know what? We're not going to ever have the answers, at least all the answers. We just have to figure it out as we go. And I think that's a similar experience for birthing a law firm or deciding to start your own practice. Is you're not going to have all the answers. Yes, it's good to have a plan for sure. I'm not saying just jump in with blind faith, with absolutely no plan, but you're not going to have all the answers before you start. And it's so scary, but leap and the net will appear.
I love that. But it's one of the, like, I just, the more that we do these shows, the more I have people saying the same thing, but in slightly different ways. And I just hope like it gets through to somebody, by the time you've heard the 15th, 20th, 30th firm owner just telling you, like, make that jump, leap and the net shall appear, like whatever I'm just hoping it gets through for some people, because I talk to so many, the associates or the junior partner who can't make enough decisions to move the firm the right way, but feels stuck. I'm so thankful that I get to interview a bunch of people that did make this jump and enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned, so one of the things you mentioned about knowing you want to jump, loving the prior job, but knowing you wanted more control. Along with that, was there any other changes or things you wanted to make sure you had in your firm on day one?
On day one, that's a good question. Not that I can think of specifically on day one. There were things that I knew I wanted sooner rather than later. So for example, on day one, I didn't have practice management software because I didn't have money, thought I couldn't afford it. But when I did, as soon as I had a few cases coming in the door and could afford it, I got it. But I knew that I wanted to explore other options than what we used at the previous firm. Ironically, I went back to that same software. Nothing's perfect, I found out. But I knew that I wanted that. I knew that I wanted systems, documented systems and procedures. That was one of my main frustrations or challenges, I would say, at the previous firm, is I had all these ideas about how to do things more efficiently. And it's absolutely a work in progress. Absolutely. Like even now, 11 years later. But I was so tired of answering the same questions from staff day in and day out. And I wanted to document it. And I was told, well, I'll do that. I, meaning the firm management, you work on getting the cases out, which in retrospect makes sense somewhat. They wanted me to actually generate income. I get that now as a firm owner, but it was frustrating because I had these ideas and then they weren't implemented and I felt stuck, answering the same questions with the same inefficiencies in place. And I was very intentional about, when I started the practice, having a business plan. It was not sophisticated at all. It was something I put together myself just from looking at business plans on Google. But I was very intentional about having processes documented even before I had employees, trying to build out the system and processes so that it's in place when I did have employees come on board, and then eventually having them help me build out the systems and further document.
Sure, but by having that baseline, it's easier to bring people on. It's easier to train them. It's easier to know, people have done their part of it the right way, the right time, the right everything. I mean, that was such a smart thing that I feel like 90% of people I talked to did the opposite, or they didn't do it until afterwards.
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to talk about transparency and empathy. So you've got this from the standpoint of core values. Explain to me, like, when did you know these would be important, or what makes them so important? Like, what was the initial impetus to push these things so seriously?
The word clarity has always been key for me when practicing immigration law. And I never really came up with a great tagline for our practice. Like, even today, I still don't really have one that I love. But something like clarity in immigration law was important to me. That concept of being clear, meaning it's important to me for the clients to have a clear understanding of the case strategy, of the various steps that they have to go through, why things happen the way that they happen. Immigration law is not logical at all. It's the opposite a lot of times of logical. And it's not intuitive. So it's really important to me for clients to feel educated about the process, to understand what to expect. I don't like surprises, when it comes to my career or my ability to move to a different country. And I'm sure other people don't either. So to the extent that we can prevent that through educating them about what to expect, I think that really helps reduce the anxiety about this really stressful process that they're going through.
And is this a thread that's been with you from that unpaid internship through the associate all the way into the firm? Like, is this something that you've seen in the industry, or is this something you felt like most other firms aren't doing enough?
Both. So
Okay.
I wouldn't say that I identified it as a core value when I was in college as a student paralegal at that firm. But it is something that I became more and more aware of when I was practicing. And again, I felt like I wasn't empowered to set up systems and procedures to educate clients about that. My job was to get through the work and to generate revenue, which again, in retrospect, is understandable. But it really came to light a couple of years ago, when I decided to establish written core values for Sumner immigration law. And when I went through that exercise of establishing core values, two of those were transparency and empathy, which I think is just critical in general, but in life, but especially for dealing with clients who are going through this process. I tell my team, it's like if we went into the hospital for open heart surgery. It's probably a once in a lifetime experience. That might be the 5th surgery of the day for the doctor or the nurse or whoever it is you're talking to. So they are having to answer the same questions over and over again. But it's important for us as the professionals to be patient, to understand this is probably the first time for them, maybe not, but probably the first time for them, maybe the only time they're going to go through it. And they have questions, and it's our job to be there to support them and answer them, and not just answer them like, okay, yes, this is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you expect next, but to be empathetic and authentic and transparent in what we do.
Well, and it's interesting, you bring up those examples. So I just read Paradox of Choice last week, and he talks about, they did this study. And so of interviewing people who did not have cancer, like 68% of them wanted to be the one who made the decision on their treatment if they had cancer. But then when they interviewed people who actually had it, only like 12% of people wanted to make the choice themselves. And so it's this fascinating balance between like making sure we give people enough information in the moment, understanding that they think they want it, but when push comes to shove, they do want to be able to trust you in the knowledge base. And I love every medical, like whenever we use examples, we use medical, I think people understand them so much more than with lawyers, but it sounds like that's very similar here, like getting the right information out there, but also walking people through a crazy path with your experience.
It is, and that's a really good point. So much of immigration law, like what we expect to happen in a given case, is based on experience, on our practical experience. But then if I don't know the answer to a question, like for example, how long is it going to take to get an interview at this particular post in this particular country in Africa? I might do 2 of those cases a year or 1 of those cases a year, so I don't necessarily have the answer, but we rely on other colleagues who also have clients going through the system to get that information. And it's also, when I practice, going to what you just said about cancer patients, saying that they maybe 12% would want to be the one, they would be 12% would want to actually make the decision about treatment. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting perspective. And I hadn't thought of it as applied to immigration law. A lot of times clients will ask me, well, what's the easiest way? Or what should I do? My approach to practicing law is to give clients all of the options and the pros and cons of each option, but to have them decide. I don't decide for them. But that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I have thought that, you don't want to be the one to decide, because what if it's the wrong choice, or it's a really stressful situation for them and they may not have the mental capacity or emotional capacity to make that decision. So I totally understand that. I still am not going to decide for them, but that
Fair
is
enough.
why that does go to transparency and educating the client. That is why it's so important to outline all of their options and to outline the pros and cons of each and help them think through. When I'm advising clients, I advise them not only on the immigration implications, but to the extent that I can, ethically and practically, other implications. A lot of times I'll say, well, a practical concern is X. I know you don't want to put your job in London before X date, and so maybe this is another option that may work better for you. So it's important to kind of look at their life situation holistically.
So I want to back up for a second, because I think that you made such a strong point there. But when you're sitting down to do these core values, I know you identified this as 2 of them, but like walk me through a little bit of that process, because it's interesting to me how, you talked about the OCD stuff and answering consistent questions. Like there was definitely a consistency that you were looking for here. It sounds like, was that part of the reason of doing the core values?
The reason for doing core values is so that we know who we are and to kind of help define how we operate as a team and how we present to the outside world as a team. It's kind of like driving principles behind how we operate. Because it could be, if our value is efficiency and profitability, and that's it. And of course, we want to be efficient, we want to be profitable. I think that those are also in the best interest of the client as well. But doing that in a way that makes for a great experience for the client and makes us feel good about the work that we're doing. It's not necessarily all about how we feel, but we want to feel like we're helping, serving other people. And if there was a team member or prospective team member who didn't feel that way, who didn't align with those values and had great immigration skills, otherwise, that's great, but you're not a good fit for our team. You're not going to jive well with the rest of us, and you're just not a good fit, which is fine. There's another place for you.
So how did these core values come to be? I mean, was there, like, was it a sit down with the whole office? Did you come in with these things? Was there research into this? Like, what did that look like?
It was a process of at least several hours of me, or probably over the period, I don't honestly remember, but over the period probably of several weeks, thinking about, I knew I wanted to define the core values for the team, or for Sumner immigration law. I'm not, forcing other people to have these core values as individuals, but as a team, what our core values would be. So it was a process of several weeks, and then taking a few hours to sit down and parse through them myself, and then talking to the team about them and making sure that they felt like that was aligned with how we operate and present to the world as well, and honestly getting their buy-in.
And it's so interesting to me because you're talking about it from the standpoint, like, if a firm had profitability and efficiency, those are more internal things. Empathy, I think, is obviously an external thing. I mean, you are truly trying to understand somebody else as much as possible. And then transparency, I think, is a really interesting one, because it's not really internal or external. It's removing the barrier between the difference of those things. Were you intentionally trying to balance more of that with some of the more internal stuff, or was this just something like, why did these appeal to you or appeal to Sumner immigration law? Does that make sense as a question?
Can you rephrase it or ask it again?
Yeah, I can try. I find so many, so many firms don't have core values, but then when they do, they're very internal. We want to do this. We want to
Got it.
do things
Yeah.
quickly. This is very empathy being very external, being very, client focus in a true way.
Yes.
And then obviously transparency being the removal of that difference between the external and internal. Like they're very interesting and different core values.
Yes. Yeah, I would like to think that that's how I am as a person. I know that I'm an empath. I don't know if you've heard that term, but I absorb the energy of other people, for better or for worse. And I can read other people's emotions more easily, maybe than another person would be able to. And transparency is really important to me, just as a person, being transparent about what you're thinking and why you're doing things. You can ask my husband to double check if that's actually true. But being authentic is important to me as a person. And so that naturally translates to the business that I'm leading. But I think it's important, how they say you can compete on, let me see if I can think of the three, on price, speed, or being good. Like you can be good, fast, or cheap.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to compete on price. So I'm going to be good and as fast as we can be, but being good for me includes attracting a client base. It includes being empathetic and transparent, educating the client well, and hopefully attracting a client base that appreciates that. Not everyone's going to appreciate that. Some people just want it done, be done, bye. That's totally fine. And we may be able to serve them well, but I want to be really intentional about attracting a client base, not who necessarily has a billion questions about the process. I mean, that's natural if you have questions, and we're happy to answer them, but not somebody who's necessarily overly anxious about the process, but just somebody who really appreciates being educated about the process and knowing what all of the options are and the pros and cons of each, that kind of thing. That's the type of client. You talk in general, people talk about defining your ideal client. That's part of who our ideal client is. Somebody who wants to connect on a personal level, wants to be more than just a number, and who wants to really know that their attorney is thinking about all possible aspects of their case.
Yeah, I'm gonna go slightly off topic, but you've just touched on so many things that I really love. You talked about the empath, the empathetic part of it. But I have to imagine there's the at least potential for there to be somewhat of a negative. Like there's the potential for you to bring on too many of the client's problems. So for the lawyers out there who not necessarily feel that way, but who know that they care, how do you balance caring and not caring too much to get, ground down?
That's so hard. But I think the very first step is being aware of it. For so long, I didn't realize that I was an empath. I didn't realize even what that was. I didn't know it was a thing. So I think the very first step is realizing, and everybody is empathetic, meaning in the sense of an empath absorbs people's energies and reads their emotions to a certain extent. It's just where you fall on the spectrum. But I think the very first step is knowing that you tend to absorb other people's energies and emotions. And then being very intentional about creating boundaries, whether that is boundaries about these are the hours that I'm going to check email and I'm not going to check email after 6 p.m. or whatever it is, or creating boundaries about what your work hours are, or creating boundaries on when you allow yourself to think about a case, compartmentalizing. And that's really, really hard to do.
I was going to say, how do you do?
So hard. But I think it sounds so, I don't know, but the practice of trying to live in the moment is something that nobody is perfect at, for sure. It's something that my word for the year is presence. Trying to live in the moment and be really, really present in what's happening now. So if that's at work, fine, think about work cases. But if I'm not, think about whatever it is that I'm doing. So one of the ways that I do that is I have these practices, kind of grounding practices. So like if I'm walking my dog, I think about, it sounds so ridiculous, but it works. I think about, I do what's called a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 practice. So I notice 5 things that I see that I haven't noticed before. And I do the same route twice a day with my dogs. And then I'll notice 4 sounds, and then 3 feelings, and then 2 scents and 1 taste. And you can switch it up. But that practice brings you into the moment. And if you think about those things, you can't be thinking about the case that you're stressed out about. And my mind wanders, absolutely. So I just bring it back. It's like meditation. When you meditate, and if you try to sit there and think of nothing, you're going to think of all the things, but you just bring your mind back. And it's the practice of actually bringing your mind back that's, I think, more valuable than actually sitting there with a totally empty mind. Or if you're walking, it's the practice of noticing, oh, my mind wandered. I'm thinking about this case that I'm anxious about, and bringing your attention back to the actual moment, to what you see around you or smell around you or whatever it is.
Interesting. I am the king of like coming back from a walk with like 14 reminders to be like, oh, this would be a great idea, this, that, and the other. I like the idea of trying to focus on the moment, or at least bring yourself back to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. All right. So, and I think that's a point that is consistent among our colleagues, the caring so much or not shutting off the thinking about work, caring about work, etc. And you're right. I mean, sometimes you need to have that boundary.
Yeah, the other thing that we've started recently in terms of boundary, a lot of times we'll have case status meetings and we'll say to each other, we care more about this person's case than they do. Like, why are they taking months and months and months to get us the documents? And so we've established boundaries, timelines to get us the documents within a set amount of time. And if they don't, we have the option of either terminating the case and refunding unearned fees, or adding on an additional case maintenance, monthly case maintenance fee. And that's helped a lot to know that there is an end in sight. Like, if nothing else, it's helpful to tell ourselves, you know what, we're going to do our very best for this person or company or whatever it is, but we're not going to drag things out unnecessarily if they're not interested in doing this and cooperating.
Yeah, it's yes. I mean, as a former criminal defense attorney, I know what you're going through in so many of those circumstances where it's just like, just give me the name of your witness. It's your cousin. Like, just give me their info. Like, whatever it is. It's not like I understand the, hey, fill out a 150-page application for this visa or whatever it's going to be. All right, so I want to get back into transparency and empathy. So, is there an order that matters to which one we do first?
No.
All right. So from a transparency standpoint, like, walk me through, how does that play out in your firm on the day-to-day, or how does that play out from the client experience or the client perspective?
Hopefully it plays out by them feeling like they have a bird's eye view of the case roadmap. So from the moment we start a case, from them knowing, and we send emails with infographics that are basically timelines, estimated timelines, that includes our internal estimated processing timelines and the anticipated government processing timelines. So they know from the very beginning, hopefully, whether they remember this or not, they know from the very beginning, okay, this stage of this case is probably going to take 2 years based on what Emily and the Sumner immigration team is telling me. So hopefully, we always think that, or hope that educating clients, and this is why we try to do this so much, educating clients and being really transparent about all the steps that are involved and the realistic timelines helps reduce a person's anxiety. Because if they think, if they hire us and they think, oh, she's going to file for my green card next month. No, we're not, because we have to go through steps A through Z to get there. So hopefully that having that bird's eye view of the estimated, subject to change, timeline ahead of time helps reduce that amount of anxiety, and then keeping them educated along the way. Again, a person has to absorb that information. They have to read it, pay attention to get that information. But for example, we send monthly newsletters to all of our clients and prospective clients with immigration updates. So for example, if now the I-751 receipt notices are valid for 48 months, meaning 4 years instead of 2 years, we give them that information, but also explain to them, this is what it means. If the government's expanding the validity of the receipt notices to 4 years, it's probably going to take close to that amount of time to get through this process. So not only telling them what the government says, but explaining what it means for them realistically. So updating them along the way, in addition to giving the kind of roadmap at the beginning of the process.
So along those lines, I'm gonna give everybody listening this homework, and don't worry, I'm sure it's potentially enjoyable. If you've never ordered from Domino's, please go order a pizza and follow the Domino's pizza tracker. Because if they can walk you through like your pizza's it's being made, it's in the oven, it's being reviewed, it's in the box, it's on, like watch that experience for a pizza. And then imagine how your clients feel when it's being able to stay in this country or not going to prison or getting the recovery after their PI case or having their estate plan put together. Like if Domino's can tell me that they're putting the pizza in the box, your firm can tell me that in 4 months you are working on, this major part of it. And that's what the client's concerned about. I hope, assuming they are concerned, assuming you don't care more about their case than they do. They're
Yes.
curious as to what's going on and what the next step is and what the last step was. And it's fascinating to me, this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. That's what we aim for. And it's a work in progress for sure. I'm sure if you talked to some of my clients, they would, point out gaps in the process, but it's a continual, and that's one of the things I love about my job is looking for places that we can continuously improve. But I think that what you just described, that whether you're ordering a Domino's pizza or getting your green card or any of the other examples you just gave, I think and hope it reduces the client's anxiety so much to know this is where we are in the process and these are the steps that follow and the estimated timeline. And that on our end, going to the points of profitability and efficiency, reduces the amount of questions that we have and the kind of hand-holding that we may have to do otherwise if we didn't proactively provide that.
Well, and the thing I love, so you've mentioned clients having questions a number of times. We talked about it from an efficiency standpoint and they're alleviating their concern. But like, look, everybody, we are in the most content heavy moment in life, but that allows you to provide your clients slightly different experiences the way they want. You can send them one email with like your 15 biggest FAQs and all of them go to a different video, or they can expand upon them or not. Like there's ways to do this so you're not overburdening the people that just want to give you the trust and be done with it, while still having that information there available for the people that want to go super deep. I mean, like, I think we've all had those clients that probably know just as much or more about our own area of law after going through it because they asked so many great questions, because they experienced it, because they went above and beyond. You can appeal to both of those people with the fact of having a repository of questions, having the monthly newsletter, like whatever that's going to be, instead of having to answer a million questions from every client every day.
Yes, absolutely. And the opposite side of that same coin is I encourage clients, we all do, to ask questions because we tell them those questions are what helps us build out our FAQs and refine them and change them over time. Or and I tell my team this, if a client asks a question that we haven't addressed, then, and let's say it's case specific to them, we have the time to actually give them that highly customized answer because we have all those other FAQs addressed. So we don't have to spend time addressing all of those other questions.
Well, and from a content creation standpoint, a sales standpoint, a marketing standpoint, the one client who has that question, there's 10 other clients that have it or didn't think to have it or are interested in the answer. As opposed to, a lot of firms just being dismissive of like, oh my God, I have to explain this to Mrs. Jones again about whatever.
For sure.
But I love that.
Yeah, we love questions. Some days.
That's true, right? It depends upon anyway. So anything else about transparency before we move into empathy?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So we touched on the downside of being an empathetic lawyer. But from the standpoint of empathy as a core value as a firm, how does that play out?
I think it's tremendously important, especially in immigration law, though you could, I'm sure, translate this or transfer this to any other area of law. But our clients come to us, whether you're practicing immigration or anything else, they come to us because they have a problem that they don't know how to address themselves. Otherwise, they would. And like you said, Google could potentially tell them how. But they're coming to us with a problem. In immigration law, or any other area of law, it's very stressful for them. This is probably something that they haven't been through before. They don't know what other options are. A lot of our clients or prospective clients tell us they've done lots of research online, going to what you said about content a minute ago, but they don't understand what they're reading conflicting information and they're not sure who to believe. It's a really stressful time. So just understanding, and it's also stressful. You would think that now that we are out of the last presidential administration, immigration law would be less stressful. And it is in some ways, but a key stressor right now is processing time, government processing time, whether we're talking about the immigration agency here in the US, USCIS, or wait times for visa appointments overseas or Department of Labor processing. It is astronomical, worse than I've seen in my 18 years of practice. And that's tremendously frustrating. We can be as efficient as possible and get everything filed, and there's nothing to do. It's so frustrating to tell a client, literally the only thing I know to do to get this case moving like you want it to is to litigate, is to file a mandamus action. That's really frustrating. So just to have empathy when, you get the 18th email of the day saying, hey, when is my H-1B going to be approved? Or when is my spouse's interview going to be scheduled at the US consulate overseas? It wears on you, especially as an empath, to get those questions, especially in the volume that we do. So I encourage my team to take a deep breath before you respond, or even not respond immediately. And when we do respond, to respond with empathy and say something like, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this. I know it's really frustrating, and then go into whatever the answer is. But I think that little moment of taking that time to, acknowledge their feelings and to acknowledge that they're valid and that I would be feeling the same way too, I think makes a tremendous difference. And like I said, not everybody cares about that, but our clients, I think, do.
Well, I love the way you talked about that, whatever it was, 10, 15 minutes ago, trying to attract the right kind of person. And it's the one who values the same thing as your core values.
Yes, absolutely. And even if they don't, if you have an upset client, because, we all make mistakes. So I have had situations where our practice makes a mistake that's fixable, fortunately, but we make a mistake. And the first thing that I do is apologize and own it and tell them, yes, this is what happened. Again, going to transparency. This is what happened. This is how it happened. This is what we are doing. I know it doesn't help you and your situation right now, but this is what we're doing in the future to prevent it from happening to future clients. And then, yeah, of course,
so
that I think goes so far with clients who are upset.
Yeah, I mean, how do I, like you mentioned, like I always talk from the standpoint, nobody wants to hire a lawyer. You say they have a problem that they don't know how to solve. And we all hit these moments in life where shit happens that you can't control or don't know how to deal with or doesn't go the right way. And so it's just a question of, how are you going to handle it? Or more importantly, how's the company going to handle it? And in the standpoint of, being overbilled for the wrong thing, or having this or have someone deliver to the wrong address, or whatever it's going to be, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of apology, a little bit of whatever can go very far when it's honest, when it's truthful, when it's authentic, not when it's what they read off of page 72 of the script that they have for dealing with aggravated clients.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where do you see? So I'm always fascinated from immigration by how, like, you have the most political area of law. Like, truly, it is governed by the politics of Washington. So where does empathy play into that? I mean, where do you see the fervor on either side of immigration matters affect your firm? Or maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
Oh, it absolutely does.
It does. Okay.
Yeah. It absolutely does. And my practice areas are employment-based and some family-based. So not the most politicized, we're not talking about asylum or deportation defense or things like that. But it absolutely is politicized. So I think empathy is tremendously important for that, because there is so much that we can't control, that we as attorneys can't control, or the employers hiring them can't control, or the individuals can't control. It's not a situation where there's the statute and the regulations, and then maybe some policy guidance, and that's it. There's so many other factors that play into how a case is going to play out, and that includes approval or denial, the duration, their options in the meantime, that type of thing. So I think it's tremendously important to express to clients, that exists, because a lot of times they think that, especially on the individual side, they think that if you just hire an immigration lawyer, they'll make the case go faster. They can just pick up the phone and call Department of State or USCIS, and no, we can't. We have the exact same phone numbers that you have access to.
You can, but right, it's the same lane.
Yeah. So just acknowledging that it is a really frustrating process. It's a really long process, and that there's so many factors that you can't control, and acknowledging that sometimes feels really crappy to not feel like you are in control, and then helping them identify the things that we can control, I think is helpful.
I love that. So what, I got one more question before we do the ones at the end. What advice do you have for a fellow law firm owner who feels similarly that you do, like feels these ways to put this client experience better? What advice would you have for them to implement it in their practice, or to implement it with their team members to implement it in their practice?
Well, I think first it's important to hire team members who share similar values. Again, I tell my team, I'm not imposing, these are the core values for Sumner Immigration, but I'm not saying that you as an individual have to go live this out every day. But they do. I mean, just naturally, I tend to attract team members who have the same or similar values. So I think that's really important, because if you don't have team members who are happy to live out those values, then they're going to be out of alignment, and that's going to show up in how they interact with clients and other team members and the team as a whole. So I think that's really key, being really intentional about hiring and values when you're hiring, even to the point of listing values in your job ads, your openings. Sorry, what was the second question? Second part of that question?
No, I mean, that was like in terms of implementing it in the firm, but really implementing it in the employees to implement it in the firm.
Yes. And then when it comes to implementing it in the firm, it has to be part of the culture, which I don't really know what the answer for that is, except living it out yourself, making sure that you are living by those values when you're making decisions for the business. So whatever your values are, just, there's no magic answer for that, but being really intentional when you're making business decisions about, does this align with my core values? And if not, how can I be more in alignment? And then in terms of the client experience, just knowing that it does not have to be all done overnight or at once. It's not going to be. It's much easier, and the only way to do it is to do it bit by bit, to take one little section of, okay, I think this client experience could be better, and this is a way that I can implement that. And then the more that you do that, it builds, and you get more and more ideas, and the systems build on each other, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. But you have to start really, really small and know that not only are you not going to do everything immediately, but you can't. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I love the way that you frame that from the standpoint of, like, the more you make it, I guess, all encompassing, maybe that's not the exact right word, but like the more that it is everywhere in what you're doing and what they're doing, what the firm is, the easier all this becomes.
Yes, definitely.
So anything else that we missed? Anything else we need to cover when it comes to transparency, empathy, core values?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, in that case, for anybody who's been listening and wants to connect with you more, wants to hear some of this wisdom, wants to see this in action, has clients that are interested in some help with business immigration type stuff, what's the best way for them to stay connected with you?
Sure. Sumner Immigration Law is on social media. We have a Facebook page, a LinkedIn page, and Instagram page. I post frequently on my personal LinkedIn page, and I'm happy to connect with individuals there as well.
Awesome. And so for anybody watching this, we'll have the links. For anybody listening to this, it is normal spelling, Sumner, along those lines for Sumner. Cool. All right. So to everybody watching and listening, we will see you back here next week, Thursday, 6 p.m. for our next episode of Exhibit A, where we interview attorneys and other experts from across the country to talk about what it truly takes to be the Exhibit A of a successful attorney. But before we truly go, I want one more nugget of wisdom from you, Emily. I think there's so much interesting stuff in here that we've talked about, and I love the way that you've really walked us through it as a story in a very relatable way for fellow law firm owners. But if somebody's been listening for the last 55 minutes and remembers nothing you said, what would be your most important takeaway, your biggest piece of advice, the thing that you want as many law firm owners as possible to know to help them be the Exhibit A of a successful attorney?
That I think your happiness and practice and your profitability boils down to being really intentional about your core values, and then figuring out how you can run your practice and interact with your team and clients in alignment with those core values.
I love that so much. I find myself telling people, like, the best advice is not business advice. It's not relationship advice. It's life advice. And I think you sum that up so well into the standpoint of running a firm, because the more that everybody buys into that, you don't have to remember who you're supposed to be in this moment, or, you're not punching in the clock and now trying to follow the core values. You're really just being yourself. Yes. And having that be the right thing.
Yes. You'll be so much happier.
I so agree. Thank you so much for being with us today, Emily. Thank you to everybody for watching and listening. We'll see you back here next week, Thursday at 6 p.m.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Exhibit A Attorneys. If you're interested in becoming the Exhibit A of Successful Attorney, please check us out at LegalEaseMarketing.com, EASE.